The sound of piano music drifting through the darkness stopped Preston Wade dead in his tracks, his hand frozen on the barn door as every muscle in his body tensed with disbelief, because that piano had not been played in 3 long years. He stood there in the cool Montana night, the September wind carrying the haunting melody across his ranch like a ghost rising from the grave. His heart hammered against his ribs, each note striking something deep within his chest that he had thought was permanently sealed away. The music was beautiful, almost painfully so, filling the empty spaces of his land with a sweetness that did not belong in this harsh place he had made of his life. Preston was 32 years old, and he had not allowed beauty or softness anywhere near him since the day he buried his younger sister Margaret 3 years ago. She had been the one who played that piano, the one who brought light into their rough ranch house 20 miles outside of Concordia, Montana. When fever took her at just 19 years old, something inside Preston had cracked clean through, and he had locked the door to the parlor where the piano sat and never opened it again. Yet someone was in there now, playing Margaret's piano, and Preston's shock rapidly transformed into anger as his boots carried him swiftly across the yard toward the house. His ranch hands were all bedded down in the bunkhouse for the night, and he had been doing a final check of the horses when the music started. Whoever had broken into his home would face the full force of his fury. He mounted the porch steps 2 at a time, his spurs jingling sharply in counterpoint to the melody still flowing from inside. The front door was unlocked because this was Montana ranch country in 1885, and Preston had never feared anything enough to lock his doors. Perhaps that had been foolish. He pushed inside, moving quickly through the front hall toward the parlor, where lamplight glowed beneath the door he had kept closed for so long. Preston threw open the door, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver at his hip, but the words of confrontation died in his throat. Sitting at Margaret's piano was a young woman he had never seen before, her fingers moving gracefully across the keys, her dark hair falling in loose waves down her back. She wore a simple traveling dress of deep blue, now dusty and worn, and her face in profile showed delicate features drawn with exhaustion and something deeper, something that looked like profound sorrow. She had not heard him enter over the sound of her own playing, lost completely in the music. Preston stood frozen, watching her hands dance across the ivory keys, drawing out a melody that seemed to reach into his chest and squeeze his heart. The anger drained out of him, replaced by confusion and an uncomfortable tightness in his throat that he refused to acknowledge. Then she struck a wrong note, and her hand stilled. She sat motionless for a moment before her shoulders slumped, and Preston heard her draw in a shaking breath. When she finally turned and saw him standing in the doorway, she gasped and jumped to her feet, the piano bench scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "I am so sorry," she said quickly, her voice soft but clear, touched with an accent that suggested Eastern education. "I did not mean to trespass. I was traveling through and my horse went lame about a mile from here. I saw your lights and walked here hoping for help, but when I knocked, no one answered. I should not have come inside, but it was getting so cold, and I saw the piano through the window, and I have not played in so long." She was babbling now, her hands twisting together in front of her, and Preston could see that she was trembling, though whether from cold or fear or something else, he could not tell. He realized he was still standing there like a statue, his hand near his gun, his face likely showing the storm of emotions churning through him. "That piano has not been played in 3 years," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "No one touches that piano." The woman's face paled and she took a step back, her eyes wide. They were remarkable eyes, Preston noticed despite himself, a deep brown that caught the lamplight. "I am truly sorry. I will leave immediately. If you could just point me toward the nearest town, I will trouble you no more." "In the dark, with a lame horse." Preston shook his head, forcing himself to think practically despite the chaos in his chest. "That would be foolish. Concordia is 20 miles south and there's nothing but wilderness between here and there." "I have imposed enough," she said, but her voice wavered, and Preston could see that she was near the end of her strength. He took a deep breath. Pushing down the complicated tangle of emotions the sound of the piano had awakened. His mother had raised him to be a gentleman, even if these rough years had buried most of that upbringing under layers of grief and solitude. "What is your name?" "Olivia Owens," she answered, lifting her chin slightly despite the fear still evident in her expression. "I am traveling from Boston to Oregon, where I am to meet my aunt. I was told there was a coach road through here, but I think I may have gotten turned around." "You are miles from any coach road," Preston said, "and traveling alone, that is dangerous." "I had little choice in the matter." Something flashed in her eyes, a spark of defiance that surprised him. "And I can take care of myself, generally speaking. Tonight was simply unfortunate." Preston studied her for a long moment. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24, and despite the weariness and dust of travel, there was a refinement to her bearing that spoke of a different world than his rough Montana ranch. "You can stay in the guest room tonight. In the morning, we will see about your horse and getting you on your way." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. That is very kind, especially given that I broke into your home and played your piano without permission." "It was my sister's piano," Preston found himself saying, the words escaping before he could stop them. "She died 3 years ago. I have not been able to go into this room since." Olivia's expression softened into something achingly sympathetic. "I am so sorry for your loss." "She must have been very dear to you." "She was." Preston turned away, unable to look at that understanding in her eyes. "The guest room is upstairs, second door on the right. There are linens in the cupboard. I will bring you some water and something to eat. You do not have to trouble yourself." "It is no trouble." He paused in the doorway, not looking back. "And Miss Owens, thank you for the music. It has been a long time since this house heard any." He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the wooden floors as he made his way to the kitchen. His hands were shaking slightly as he pumped water into a pitcher, and he gripped the counter edge, breathing deeply. The sound of the piano still echoed in his head, weaving through his thoughts like a river cutting through stone. Margaret had played every evening, filling their house with music that made their harsh life seem softer, more bearable. She had talked about going east to study music properly, about playing in concert halls where people would pay to hear her talent. Preston had been saving money to send her when the fever came through. It had swept through the territory that winter, claiming dozens of lives, and Margaret had been one of them despite everything Preston had done to save her. He had ridden through a blizzard to fetch the doctor from Concordia, but it had not been enough. Afterward, he had thrown himself into the ranch, working from before sunrise to long after dark, exhausting himself so completely that he fell into dreamless sleep each night. He had let his ranch hands go except for the 3 most essential, cut himself off from the social life of Concordia, and turned his sprawling ranch into a fortress of solitude. It was easier to feel nothing than to feel the crushing weight of loss. But tonight, that music had reached into the frozen wasteland he had made of his heart and touched something he thought was dead. It terrified him. Preston prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and cold chicken, arranged it on a tray with the water pitcher and a glass, and carried it upstairs. He knocked on the guest room door, and Olivia opened it after a moment. She had removed her dusty traveling jacket and tidied her hair, though she still looked exhausted. "Thank you," she said, taking the tray from him. "You have been far kinder than I deserved, given the circumstances." "Get some rest," Preston said gruffly. "We will talk in the morning." He retreated to his own room, but sleep would not come. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the sound of the piano and the image of Olivia sitting there, lost in the music. Eventually, he rose and stood at his window, looking out over his land. The ranch spread out in the moonlight, thousands of acres of grassland and hills, the cattle dark shapes in the distance. He had built this all himself, starting with nothing but determination, and the small inheritance his parents had left. It should have been enough to satisfy him, but tonight it felt hollow. Morning came too soon and too slowly all at once. Preston rose with the sun, as he always did, splashed water on his face from the basin, and dressed in his work clothes. He could smell coffee from the kitchen and realized that Olivia must be awake already. When he came downstairs, he found her standing at the stove, having somehow located his meager supplies and made breakfast. "I hope you do not mind," she said, glancing over her shoulder at him. "I wanted to do something to repay your hospitality. You did not have to do that." Preston moved to the table, feeling oddly off balance in his own kitchen. No one had cooked for him since Margaret died. "I wanted to." She brought over plates of eggs and bacon, along with fresh coffee, and sat across from him. In the morning light streaming through the window, he could see her more clearly. She was lovely, with a gentle beauty that was quite unlike the rougher women of Concordia. But there were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands bore fresh calluses that spoke of recent hardship. They ate in silence for a few minutes before Preston said, "Tell me the truth. Why are you really traveling alone?" Olivia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully, meeting his eyes with that same defiant spark he had seen the night before. "I was supposed to be married 3 months ago. To a man my father chose, a business associate from New York. Charles was his name. He was wealthy, respectable, and completely indifferent to anything I wanted from life." "So you ran away." "I left," she corrected. "I waited until after my father died. He had been ill for some time. Once he was gone, there was nothing holding me to Boston anymore. My mother died when I was young, and I have no siblings. My aunt in Oregon has been writing to me for years, inviting me to come live with her. She is my mother's sister, a widow with her own home and independence. She offered me the same." Preston took a sip of his coffee, considering this. "And Charles was not pleased with my departure." A shadow crossed her face. "He felt that our engagement was a binding contract, regardless of my father's death. He may have attempted to follow me. I have been traveling under my mother's maiden name just in case." "Owens is not your real name." "It is my real name, just not the one Charles would be looking for." She lifted her chin. "I know it must seem cowardly to run, but I could not marry him. I could not spend my life with someone who looked at me like I was property to be acquired." Preston thought about the music he had heard last night, the passion and sorrow woven through every note. "You play beautifully. Did he appreciate that?" Olivia laughed, but there was no humor in it. He thought music was an acceptable parlor accomplishment for a wife, as long as it did not interfere with my duties as hostess and mother to his children. "He actually told me I would need to stop playing once we had our first child, as it would be too distracting from my responsibilities." Anger flared in Preston's chest, surprising him with its intensity. "Then he is a fool." She looked at him, surprise evident in her expression. "Thank you for saying that." After breakfast, Preston took Olivia to see her horse. The animal was indeed lame, favoring its front left leg significantly. Preston examined it carefully, running his hands down the leg while murmuring soothingly to the nervous mare. "It is not broken, but she has strained the tendon badly," he said, straightening up. "She needs rest, at least a week, maybe 2, before she can be ridden any distance." Olivia's face fell. "I see. Is there somewhere in Concordia I could stay?" "Perhaps I could find work to pay for my room and board while she heals." Preston hesitated. The logical thing would be to take her into Concordia, help her find lodging, and send her on her way. That was what he should do, but something stopped the words before they could form. Maybe it was the memory of the piano music. Maybe it was the thought of this house falling silent again. Maybe it was the look of weary determination on Olivia's face, the same look Margaret used to get when she was fighting through a difficult piece of music. "You could stay here," he heard himself say. "Just until your horse is healed. I have the space, and frankly, the place could use a woman's touch. I am not much for keeping house. I could not impose like that." "You would be earning your keep," Preston said quickly. "Cooking, cleaning, whatever you are willing to do. And in return, you would have a safe place to stay and time to rest before continuing your journey." Olivia studied him carefully, and Preston found himself hoping she would say yes, which was absurd. He had spent 3 years avoiding human connection, and now he was inviting a stranger to stay in his home. But something about her presence had awakened a part of him he thought was gone forever, and he was not ready to let it fall back into darkness. "On one condition," Olivia said finally. "I want to play the piano. If that would be too painful for you, I understand, but music is as necessary to me as breathing. I have been without it for months, and last night reminded me how much I need it." Preston's chest tightened at the thought of hearing that music every day, of Margaret's piano coming back to life under someone else's hands. It would hurt, but maybe that was not such a bad thing. Maybe he had been numb for too long. "You can play," he said, "whenever you want." Relief and joy spread across Olivia's face, transforming it. "Thank you. Then yes, I would be grateful to stay." They settled into an unexpected routine over the following days. Preston rose early to work with his ranch hands, managing the cattle and horses, mending fences, and handling the dozens of tasks that kept a ranch functioning. Olivia took over the house, bringing order to rooms that had grown dusty and neglected under Preston's minimal attention. She cooked meals that actually had flavor and variety, scrubbed floors until they gleamed, and aired out rooms that had been closed for too long. And every evening, she played the piano. Preston would come in from the range, dusty and exhausted, and the sound of music would greet him before he even reached the house. Olivia played everything from complicated classical pieces to simple folk melodies, each one executed with skill and obvious love. Sometimes Preston would stand outside, listening, before he came in. Other times he would sit in the parlor doorway, watching her fingers move across the keys, seeing the way her whole body seemed to become part of the music. She never played the same piece twice in a row, and Preston found himself looking forward to each evening, wondering what he would hear. The music filled the empty spaces in his house, and though he was reluctant to admit it, in his heart as well. It was like ice slowly thawing after a long winter, painful but necessary. They talked over dinner, tentatively at first, then with growing ease. Olivia told him about growing up in Boston, about her mother who had died when she was 8, about her father's increasing emotional distance as his business consumed him. She spoke of her love for music, how she had begged for piano lessons until her father relented, how her teacher had told her she had real talent but that her father had dismissed it as foolishness. Preston found himself sharing things he had not spoken of in years. He told her about Margaret, about their parents who had died when he was 20 and she was 7, about how he had raised her while building the ranch from nothing. He spoke of her brightness, her determination, her dreams of being a concert pianist. And finally, haltingly, he told her about the night he had ridden through the blizzard for the doctor, only to return and find Margaret already slipping away. "She died while I was gone," he said, his voice rough with old pain. "I was not there. I should have been there." Olivia reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was the first time they had touched beyond accidental brushes in passing, and Preston felt the warmth of it spread up his arm. "You did everything you could. Sometimes that is not enough, and it is not fair, but it is not your fault. I should have protected her better. You cannot protect people from everything, Preston. That is not how life works." Her eyes were full of compassion and understanding. "If you could have saved her, you would have. She knew that. I am certain she knew that." Something broke loose in Preston's chest, some piece of the stone wall he had built around his grief. His eyes burned and he looked away, unable to meet Olivia's gaze. She squeezed his hand once more before releasing it, giving him space to collect himself. After that night, something shifted between them. The conversations grew deeper, more personal. Preston found himself seeking out Olivia's company during the day, making excuses to come back to the house for something he had forgotten, lingering over coffee in the morning before heading out to work. She would bring him lunch sometimes, riding out on one of his gentle mares to where he was working, and they would sit together in the grass, talking about everything and nothing. His ranch hands noticed, of course. Frank, his foreman, was a grizzled man in his 50s who had worked for Preston since the beginning. He cornered Preston one afternoon while they were repairing a fence. "That woman staying at your house," Frank said casually, too casually. "She seems nice." "She is," Preston replied, hammering a nail with more force than necessary. "Pretty too." "I had not noticed." Frank made a sound that was clearly disbelief. "Sure you had not. Boss, I have worked for you for near 10 years now. I have never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her." Preston lowered the hammer, meeting Frank's eyes. "It is not like that. She is just staying until her horse heals." "And when the horse is healed, what then?" Preston had been trying not to think about that. Olivia's horse was improving rapidly under his care. Already the mare could walk without limping, and it would not be long before she could travel again. The thought of Olivia leaving created a hollow feeling in Preston's chest that he did not want to examine too closely. "Then she goes to Oregon, as she planned," he said firmly. Frank shook his head. "If you say so, but for what it is worth, I think you would be a fool to let her go without telling her how you feel." "I do not know how I feel. You are a terrible liar, boss." That night, Preston stood outside the parlor door listening to Olivia play. The piece was slow and melancholy, each note laden with emotion. He recognized it as something Margaret had struggled with, never quite mastering it. But Olivia played it flawlessly, bringing out depths of feeling that made Preston's throat tight. When she finished, there was a long moment of silence. Then Preston heard her voice, soft and a bit unsteady. "You can come in, you know. You do not have to stand in the hallway." Preston pushed open the door. Olivia sat at the piano, her hands resting on the keys, her face turned toward him. In the lamplight, she looked beautiful, and Preston could no longer pretend he had not noticed. "That was Margaret's favorite piece," he said. "She could never quite get it right. She would practice for hours, getting frustrated with herself." "It is a difficult piece," Olivia said. "I struggled with it for months when I was learning." Preston moved into the room, drawn forward despite himself. "Play something happy, please." Olivia smiled and launched into a lively folk tune that had his toes tapping despite himself. It was the kind of music Margaret used to play at the rare social gatherings their neighbors held, the kind that made people want to dance. Preston found himself moving closer to the piano, watching Olivia's hands fly across the keys. When she finished, she looked up at him with laughter in her eyes. Better. Much. He sat down in the chair near the piano, the one that had always been his spot when Margaret played. Where did you learn to play like that? My teacher was from Vienna. She was quite strict, but she taught me that music is not just technical skill. It is emotion, story, soul. Every piece tells you something, reveals something about the composer and the player. Olivia ran her fingers gently over the keys, not pressing hard enough to make sound. When I play, I feel like I am most truly myself. Does that make sense? More than you know. Preston leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Margaret used to say the same thing. She said that when she played, nothing else mattered. Not being poor, not being stuck on a ranch in Montana, not all the things she could not have, just the music. She sounds like she was a remarkable person. She was. You remind me of her sometimes. Preston paused, not in a bad way. Just in the passion you have for music, the way you light up when you play. Olivia's expression softened. That is one of the kindest things anyone has ever said to me. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Preston felt something shift in the air between them, a tension that was both uncomfortable and thrilling. He found himself noticing the curve of Olivia's neck, the way the lamplight caught in her hair, the soft pink of her lips. His heart was beating faster, and he realized with sudden clarity that Frank had been right. He was falling in love with her. The realization should have terrified him. He had closed himself off from this kind of feeling, convinced himself he was better off alone. But sitting here with Olivia, surrounded by music and soft light, it felt natural. It felt right. Preston, Olivia said softly, and the way she said his name made his breath catch. I need to tell you something. What is it? She turned on the piano bench to face him fully. My horse is healed. She has been healed for days now. I checked her this morning and she is ready to travel. The words hit Preston like a physical blow. I see. I should go. I have already stayed longer than planned and my aunt is expecting me. But Olivia's voice lacked conviction and she was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. Preston stood up abruptly, unable to sit still. He paced to the window, looking out at the dark land beyond. Is that what you want to go? I do not know. Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper. 2 weeks ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. I was so focused on getting to Oregon, on starting my new life, on being free. But now, Preston turned back to face her, his heart hammering. Olivia rose from the piano bench, her hands clasped in front of her. Now I find myself reluctant to leave. This place, this house, you, it all feels like something I did not know I was looking for. You barely know me. I know enough. She took a step toward him. I know you are kind, even when you try to hide it behind gruffness. I know you work yourself to exhaustion every day because you feel like it is the only way to outrun your grief. I know you loved your sister so much that you locked away everything that reminded you of her because the pain was too great. And I know that when you listen to me play, you look like you are finally allowing yourself to heal. Preston closed the distance between them before he could think better of it. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his rough, calloused hands. You have healed something in me. These past 2 weeks, you have brought light back into this house, into my life. I do not want you to go. Preston, she breathed, her eyes shining. I know I have no right to ask you to stay. You have your plans, your aunt, your new life waiting for you. But I am asking anyway because I cannot imagine going back to the way things were before you arrived. I cannot imagine this house without your music, without your laughter, without you. Olivia's hands came up to cover his, holding them against her face. I do not want to go. I thought I knew what I wanted, but everything has changed. You have changed everything. Preston leaned down and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded. Her arms came around his neck, and he pulled her closer, pouring 3 years of loneliness and grief and longing into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Please stay." "Yes," Olivia said, and she was crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, I will stay." They held each other for a long moment, swaying slightly in the lamplight, and Preston felt something inside him that had been broken for so long finally begin to mend. The piano sat silent behind them, but its music seemed to echo in the air, a promise of all the evenings to come. The next morning, Preston woke with a lightness in his chest he had not felt in years. He went downstairs to find Olivia already in the kitchen, making coffee and humming to herself. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that made his heart skip. "Good morning," she said, crossing to him and rising on her toes to kiss him. Preston wrapped his arms around her, marveling at how natural it felt. "Good morning. Sleep well, better than I have in months." She pulled back to look at him, her expression turning serious. "We should talk about what happens now. Practically speaking, I mean." Preston nodded, understanding her concern. "People in Concordia will talk if you stay here without us being married. Montana ranch country in 1885 is not exactly progressive. I do not care what people say, but I do not want to damage your reputation or business relationships. Then we will get married." Preston said it simply, as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. Olivia's eyes widened. "Preston Wade, that is possibly the least romantic proposal in the history of proposals." Preston felt heat rise in his face. "You are right, I am sorry. Let me try again." He took her hands in his, looking into her eyes. "Olivia, I know we have only known each other for 2 weeks, but you have changed my life in ways I cannot fully express. You brought music back into my home and joy back into my heart. I do not want to spend another day without you. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks, but she was smiling. "That is much better. And yes, Preston, I will marry you." They rode into Concordia together that afternoon, Olivia riding her heeled mare while Preston sat astride his big roan gelding. The town was not large, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, a boarding house, and a scattering of other businesses. But it was the center of life for the ranchers and farmers scattered across the surrounding territory. Preston took Olivia first to meet Reverend Thomas, a kind man in his 60s who had presided over Margaret's funeral. He raised his eyebrows when Preston explained they wanted to be married but did not ask too many questions. "You will need witnesses," Reverend Thomas said. "And I would recommend waiting a few days. Give people time to adjust to the news." "We would prefer to marry as soon as possible," Preston said, his hand finding Olivia's. The Reverend looked between them and seemed to understand. "Very well. Saturday, then. 3 days from now. That will give me time to post the banns and you time to make arrangements." Next, they stopped at the general store, where Mrs. Patterson, the owner's wife, nearly dropped her measuring spoons when she saw Preston walk in with a strange woman on his arm. Concordia was a small town, and gossip was currency. By evening, everyone would know that Preston Wade, who had barely spoken to anyone in 3 years, had brought a woman to town and was planning to marry her. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Olivia Owens, my fiancée," Preston said, and saying the words out loud made them feel real in a way they had not before. "We are in need of a few supplies." Mrs. Patterson recovered quickly, her curiosity evident. "Fiancé. My goodness, Mr. Wade, I had no idea you were courting anyone. How wonderful. And where are you from, Miss Owens?" "Boston, originally," Olivia said with a warm smile. though I am looking forward to making Montana my home." They spent the next hour gathering supplies while Mrs. Patterson peppered Olivia with questions. To her credit, Olivia answered graciously, revealing just enough to satisfy curiosity without sharing details about running away from her engagement or traveling alone. She said she had been traveling to Oregon when she met Preston and that they had fallen in love. It was the truth, just not all of it. When they finally left the store, Olivia was laughing. "She is quite something. She is the biggest gossip in 3 counties," Preston said. "By tomorrow, everyone will know our business." "Good. Then we will have no secrets." On their way out of town, they encountered Frank and 2 of Preston's other ranch hands, Jimmy and Carl, coming out of the saloon. Frank's weathered face split into a wide grin when he saw them together. "Well now," he said, "this is a fine sight. You 2 look happy." "We are getting married on Saturday," Preston announced, "and I am hoping you 3 will stand as witnesses." Frank let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses. "About damn time, boss. I told you not to let her go." Jimmy and Carl, both younger men in their 20s, offered their congratulations with broad smiles. They had clearly noticed Olivia during her time at the ranch and approved of their boss's choice. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Preston had rarely seen the inside of a church since Margaret died, but Olivia wanted a proper ceremony, and he would give her whatever she wanted. He dug his best suit out of storage, brushed off the dust, and took it to the Chinese laundry in Concordia to be cleaned and pressed. Olivia worked with remarkable efficiency given her limited resources. She took one of her traveling dresses and transformed it with new lace and buttons purchased from Mrs. Patterson, creating something simple but beautiful. She baked and cleaned and prepared the house for what she insisted would be a small celebration after the ceremony. Preston invited the few neighbors he was still on speaking terms with, and Olivia won them over immediately with her warmth and obvious love for Preston. By the time Saturday arrived, Preston felt both nervous and excited in a way he had not experienced since he was a young man. The wedding was simple and perfect. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony in the small white church, with Frank, Jimmy, and Carl standing as witnesses along with Mr. and Mrs. Patterson and a handful of neighbors. Olivia wore her altered dress and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers that Preston had picked for her that morning. Her face glowed with happiness as she walked down the short aisle to meet him. Preston had been worried he would feel guilty, as if marrying Olivia was somehow betraying Margaret's memory. But as he watched his bride approach, he felt nothing but joy and rightness. Margaret would have wanted this for him. She would have wanted him to find happiness again. The vows were traditional, but when Preston said the words, he meant them with every fiber of his being. He promised to love and cherish Olivia, to stand by her in sickness and health, for better or worse, until death parted them. Olivia's voice was strong and clear as she made the same promises to him, her eyes never leaving his face. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed Olivia with all the love and hope he felt for their future together. The small congregation applauded, and Frank let out another of his enthusiastic whoops. They held a simple celebration at the ranch afterward. Olivia had made a cake, and Mrs. Patterson had contributed pies. There was no liquor because Preston did not keep any in the house, but there was laughter and music. Olivia played the piano while people sang, and the house felt alive in a way it had not since Margaret died. As the sun set and the guests began to drift home, Preston stood on the porch with his arm around his wife, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Olivia leaned against him and he could feel her contentment. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I can say." She looked up at him. I thought I was running away from something when I left Boston, but maybe I was running toward this all along. I am glad your horse went lame, Olivia laughed. That is a terrible thing to say, but true. Preston pulled her closer. I am glad fate or providence or whatever you want to call it brought you to my door. You saved me, Olivia. I was drowning and I did not even know it. We saved each other. She turned in his arms to face him. I was drowning too. In expectations, in other people's plans for my life, in the feeling that I would never be free to be myself. You gave me that freedom. They went inside as the last light faded from the sky. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a celebration of the love they had found in each other. Afterward, Preston held Olivia as she slept, marveling at the turn his life had taken. 2 weeks ago he had been alone, locked in grief, convinced he would live out his days in solitude. Now he had a wife, a partner, someone who understood him in ways he had not thought possible. The weeks that followed their wedding settled into a comfortable rhythm. Olivia continued to manage the house, but Preston noticed she was starting to leave her own mark on it. She rearranged furniture, hung new curtains, planted a garden even though it was late in the season. She was making it their home, not just his. She played the piano every day, sometimes for hours, and Preston never tired of hearing it. He took to coming in from the range in the afternoon, making excuses about needing to check on something, just so he could sit and listen to her play. Sometimes she would look up and catch him watching her, and the smile she gave him never failed to make his heart race. They talked about everything under the sun. Olivia was well-educated and well-read, and she challenged Preston's thinking in ways no one had before. She had opinions about politics, about the future of the West, about the treatment of the various peoples who had been displaced by settlement. Some of her views were quite progressive, and Preston found himself reconsidering positions he had held without much thought. The way we have treated the native tribes is shameful, Olivia said one evening over dinner. These were their lands long before any of us came here, and we took them by force and trickery. It is more complicated than that, Preston began, then stopped. Was it? You are right. We tell ourselves stories to justify what happened, but the truth is simpler and uglier. I am not saying I have solutions, Olivia said, but I think we should at least be honest about history. Preston reached across the table to take her hand. You make me think, question things. I like that. Good. I would hate to bore you. You could never bore me. One morning about a month after their wedding, Olivia came out to where Preston was working with a young colt in the corral. She leaned on the fence, watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Can you take a break? She asked. Preston released the colt and climbed over the fence. What is it? Are you all right? I am fine. Better than fine, actually. She took his hands and Preston saw that she was nervous. I have something to tell you and I am not sure how you will react. Preston's mind immediately went to the worst possibilities. Whatever it is, we will face it together. Olivia took a deep breath. I am with child. I am pregnant, Preston. We are going to have a baby. For a moment, Preston could not breathe. A baby. He was going to be a father. Joy and terror warred within him in equal measure. What if something went wrong? What if he lost Olivia the way he had lost Margaret? The fear was so intense it made him dizzy. But then he looked at Olivia's face, saw the hope and uncertainty there, and he pushed the fear down. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. That is wonderful news, wonderful and terrifying, but mostly wonderful. He felt Olivia relax against him. You are happy? Yes. Preston pulled back to look at her. But I am also scared out of my mind. I could not bear it if something happened to you. Nothing is going to happen to me. Women have babies every day. Margaret died from a fever. People die from things that should not kill them all the time. Olivia cupped his face in her hands. Preston Wade, you listen to me. I am strong and I am healthy. We will get the doctor from Concordia when the time comes and everything will be fine. Do not let fear steal the joy from this." Preston knew she was right, but it was easier said than done. Still, he nodded and kissed her. "When?" "Late spring, I think." April or May. They had the whole winter to prepare then. Preston threw himself into getting ready, turning one of the upstairs rooms into a nursery, making sure they had everything they would need. Olivia watched his frantic preparations with amusement and love. "You are going to be a wonderful father," she told him one evening as they lay in bed. "How can you be sure?" "Because I see how much you love already, even though the baby has not yet arrived. Because I know you would move heaven and earth to protect this child. And because you learned from the best. You raised Margaret, and from everything you have told me, you did an excellent job." Preston pulled her close, resting his hand on her belly, which was just starting to show the slightest curve. "I hope our child has your musical talent. And your strength and determination." Winter settled over the Montana land with its usual fierce beauty. Snow blanketed the ranch, and the work became harder as Preston and his men had to make sure the cattle could access food and water. But Preston came home each evening to a warm house filled with lamplight and music, and the hardships seemed easier to bear. Olivia continued to play the piano throughout her pregnancy, her repertoire growing ever more complex. She ordered sheet music from back east, using some of the small amount of money she had brought with her. Preston loved watching her sight read new pieces, her brow furrowed in concentration, her fingers working out complicated passages. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly, just the two of them. Preston gave Olivia a new shawl and a book of poetry she had mentioned wanting. Olivia gave Preston a watch that had belonged to her father, a beautiful gold piece that Preston protested was too valuable. "I want you to have it," Olivia insisted. "It was the only thing of my father's that I brought with me, and now I want it to be yours. You can pass it down to our child someday." Preston was deeply moved by the gesture. He held the watch carefully, feeling its weight. "Thank you. I will treasure it." That night, as they sat by the fire, Olivia said, "I should write to my aunt. Let her know what happened, that I am married and staying in Montana. Do you think she will be upset? Probably more relieved than anything. She is quite elderly, and I think she offered me a home out of duty more than desire. She will be happy to know I am settled and happy." Olivia paused. "What about Charles? Should I be worried that he is still looking for me?" Preston had wondered about that himself. "It has been months now. If he was going to come after you, he probably would have by now. And if he does show up, he will find you married to a rancher who is not inclined to let anyone threaten his wife." Olivia smiled. "My fierce protector. Always." Winter gave way to early spring, and Olivia's pregnancy became more obvious. She had to let out her dresses, and Preston noticed she tired more easily. He insisted she rest more, which led to their first real argument. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," Olivia said, exasperated. "I do not need to spend all day in bed. I am just worried about you. I know, and I love you for it, but you need to trust that I know my own limits. Women work right up until birth all the time. You are not just any woman. You are my wife, and I will not risk losing you." Olivia's expression softened. "Preston, you cannot protect me from everything, and you cannot let fear control you. Our baby is going to be fine, and so am I." Preston knew she was right, but the fear was always there, lurking at the edges of his thoughts. He tried to hide it, to focus on the positive, but Olivia saw through him. One evening in early April, when Olivia was heavy with child and moving slowly, she caught Preston staring at her with worry etched on his face. She set down the book she had been trying to read and patted the couch beside her. "Come here," she said. Preston sat, and Olivia took his hand, placing it on her swollen belly. Feel that? Preston felt a firm push against his palm and caught his breath. The baby, your child, saying hello. Olivia covered his hand with hers. Preston, I need you to let go of the fear. I know why you are scared. I know what happened with Margaret, but that is not going to happen to us. I am going to be fine, the baby is going to be fine, and we are going to have a wonderful life together. I am trying. I know you are, but you have to truly believe it, not just say it. Our child is going to need a father who is present and engaged, not one consumed by worry and fear. Preston looked into her eyes and saw the absolute certainty there. She believed what she was saying completely. He took a deep breath and made a decision. He would choose faith over fear. He would believe that everything would be all right. You are right, he said. I am sorry, I will do better. We will do it together, just like everything else. 2 weeks later, on a sunny April morning, Olivia's water broke while she was making breakfast. Preston had been out checking on the horses, and when he came in to find her gripping the kitchen counter, breathing hard, his heart nearly stopped. It is time, she said, and there was excitement and fear in her voice. You need to get the doctor. Preston ran for his fastest horse, riding harder than he had ever ridden before. The 20 miles to Concordia passed in a blur. He burst into Dr. Harrison's office, startling the elderly physician who had been reviewing his accounts. My wife, Preston gasped. The baby is coming. You need to come now. Dr. Harrison, who had delivered dozens of babies over his 40 years of practice, calmly gathered his supplies and followed Preston back to the ranch. The ride back felt like it took forever, though Preston pushed the horses as fast as he dared. When they arrived, Frank had come up to the house and was sitting with Olivia, who was in the bedroom, breathing through contractions. She smiled when she saw Preston, even though he could see the pain and effort in her face. About time, she joked weakly. I am here. I am not going anywhere. Preston took her hand and stayed by her side while Dr. Harrison examined her and pronounced that everything was progressing normally. The labor was long and difficult. Hours passed, the sun moving across the sky while Olivia labored to bring their child into the world. Preston had never felt so helpless. He held her hand, wiped her face with cool cloths, murmured encouragement, but there was nothing he could do to ease her pain. As the afternoon wore into evening, Preston found himself praying, something he had not done since Margaret died. He prayed for Olivia's safety, for the baby's health, for everything to be all right. He bargained with God, promising to be better, do better, if only they both survived this. Finally, as the sun was setting and golden light filled the bedroom, Dr. Harrison said, "One more push, Mrs. Wade. Your baby is almost here." Olivia gave a final, tremendous effort, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of a baby crying. Preston felt tears streaming down his face as Dr. Harrison held up a squalling, red-faced infant. You have a son, the doctor announced. A son. Preston looked at Olivia, who was exhausted but beaming, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. Dr. Harrison cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket before placing him in Olivia's arms. Hello, little one, Olivia whispered, gazing down at their son with wonder. We have been waiting for you. Preston leaned over, looking at the tiny face of his child. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was still crying lustily, his little fists waving. He has good lungs. Takes after his mother, Olivia said, laughing and crying at the same time. Dr. Harrison finished checking both mother and baby, pronouncing them healthy and strong. You did excellently, Mrs. Wade. Rest now and call for me if there are any concerns. After the doctor left, Preston sat on the edge of the bed, unable to take his eyes off his wife and son. Olivia looked tired but radiant, cradling their baby with natural ease. You want to hold him? She asked. Preston hesitated. The baby seemed so small, so fragile, but Olivia guided his arms, showing him how to support the baby's head, and suddenly Preston was holding his son. The weight of the child in his arms, the reality of this new life they had created, overwhelmed him. "He is perfect," Preston said, his voice thick with emotion. "He is." Olivia reached up to touch Preston's face. "See, I told you everything would be all right. You did. Thank you for believing when I could not." They named him Peter, after Preston's father, with Margaret as his middle name. It was important to both of them that Margaret be remembered, that this new life carry a piece of her forward. The weeks after Peter's birth were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. The baby had to be fed constantly, and Olivia was up at all hours. Preston helped as much as he could, changing the baby, rocking him when he cried, sitting with Olivia during the endless night feedings. He had never been so tired in his life, but he also had never been so happy. Olivia recovered quickly from the birth, her strength returning day by day. As soon as she was able, she started playing the piano again, and Preston would often find her playing one-handed while holding the baby against her shoulder with the other. Peter seemed to respond to the music, often calming when Olivia played. "He is going to be musical," Preston predicted. "Just like his mother and his aunt." "We will see," Olivia said. "But either way, he will grow up surrounded by music and love." The ranch flourished under Preston's renewed energy. Having a family gave him purpose beyond just surviving, beyond just working to forget. He expanded the herd, made improvements to the property, and even started socializing more with neighbors and the people of Concordia. Olivia's warmth and friendliness drew people to them, and soon their home became a gathering place for community events. When Peter was 6 months old, Olivia organized a harvest celebration at the ranch. She cooked for days, preparing an enormous feast, and invited everyone within 20 miles. The house and yard filled with neighbors, ranch hands, and townspeople, all eating and talking and enjoying themselves. Olivia played the piano for hours while people sang and danced, and Preston watched her with so much love it almost hurt. Frank cornered Preston at one point, a cup of coffee in his hand. "You look like a different man than the one I was working for 2 years ago." "I am a different man," Preston said. "Olivia changed everything." "That she did. You are blessed, boss. I know." As the years passed, their family grew. 2 years after Peter was born, Olivia gave birth to a daughter they named Josephine. She had Olivia's dark hair and Preston's green eyes, and she was as strong-willed as both her parents combined. Preston had worried less during Olivia's second pregnancy, having been through it once before, though he still breathed a sigh of relief when both mother and daughter came through the birth healthy. 2 years after that came another son, Benjamin, who was quieter than his siblings but observant and thoughtful. The house that had once been so silent and empty now rang with children's laughter and music and life. Olivia taught all 3 children to play the piano as soon as they were old enough, and evenings often featured impromptu concerts with varying levels of skill and enthusiasm. Peter showed real talent, his small fingers finding the keys with natural ease. Josephine was more interested in vigorous, emotional playing than technical precision. Benjamin preferred to listen rather than play, but he loved music with a passion that rivaled his mother's. Preston expanded the ranch house, adding more rooms to accommodate their growing family. He was successful enough now to hire more help, both for the ranch and the house, though Olivia insisted on doing much of the cooking and childcare herself. "I do not want someone else raising my children," she said firmly when Preston suggested hiring a nanny. "I know it is fashionable back east, but this is our life, and I want to be present for all of it." Preston would not have had it any other way. He worked hard during the day but always came home for dinner, always spent time with his children before they went to bed. He taught Peter to ride when the boy was 4, and by the time Josephine was 3, she was demanding her own horse. Preston and Olivia both taught their children about the ranch, about the land, about the importance of hard work and integrity. On quiet evenings after the children were in bed, Preston and Olivia would sit together in the parlor, her head on his shoulder, and talk about their life. These were Preston's favorite moments, the peaceful intimacy of being with the person who knew him best. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked one such evening. "Running away from your old life. You could have been in a comfortable home in Boston or Oregon, probably with a piano in every room." Olivia lifted her head to look at him, her expression incredulous. "Preston Wade, how can you even ask that?" "I have never been happier in my life. This is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave up a lot." "I gave up a life that was not mine. I gave up being a decoration in someone else's carefully planned world. What I gained was immeasurable. A partner who loves me for who I am, children I adore, freedom to be myself, and yes, a piano that I play every single day because I want to, not because it is expected." She kissed him softly. "No regrets, not a single one." When Peter was 10, he asked if he could perform at the church social that summer. Olivia had been teaching him a complicated Bach piece, and he had mastered it after months of practice. Preston and Olivia sat in the audience, 7-year-old Josephine between them and 5-year-old Benjamin on Preston's lap, watching their son play. Peter's small hands moved across the keys with confidence, drawing out the intricate melody with precision and feeling. Preston felt his eyes sting with tears. Margaret would have loved this, he thought. She would have been so proud. And then, in a way that felt both surprising and natural, he realized he was not sad. He was grateful. Grateful that his sister had lived at all. Grateful for the time they had together. Grateful that her love of music had been passed down to his children through Olivia. After the performance, as people crowded around to congratulate Peter, Olivia slipped her hand into Preston's. "You are thinking about Margaret," she said softly. "It was not a question. I am. But not in the way I used to. I was just thinking she would have loved to see this. She probably is seeing it in whatever way such things work." Olivia squeezed his hand. "And I think she is happy for you, for us." "I think so too." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges but always underlaid with love. They weathered harsh winters and summer droughts, good cattle prices and bad, the normal ups and downs of ranch life. There were scares, too, like when Josephine broke her arm falling out of a tree at age 8, or when a fever swept through the area and all 3 children fell ill. But the family always pulled through, growing stronger and closer with each challenge. When Peter was 15, he announced he wanted to study music seriously, perhaps even attend a conservatory back east. Preston's first instinct was to refuse, to keep his son close and safe on the ranch. But Olivia's influence had made him wiser. "If that is what you want, truly want, then we will find a way," Preston told his son. "You have real talent, Peter. You should pursue it." Olivia beamed at Preston across the dinner table, her pride and love evident. They both knew what that decision cost Preston, how hard it was for him to let go. But they also knew it was right. Josephine, in contrast, announced at age 12 that she intended to run the ranch someday. "I do not want to play piano for a living like Peter," she declared. "I want to work with the cattle and the horses. I want to make this place even bigger and better." Preston could not have been more proud if he tried. He began teaching Josephine everything he knew about ranching, and she absorbed it all with fierce determination. By the time she was 15, She could ride better than most of the ranch hands and had a natural instinct for cattle that impressed even Frank. Benjamin, the youngest, was content to be the scholar of the family. He read voraciously, everything he could get his hands on, and talked about becoming a teacher or maybe even a lawyer. He still loved music, though he never pursued it professionally, and often accompanied his mother on the piano for their own enjoyment. Preston and Olivia watched their children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweet awareness of time passing. The house that had been filled with small children's laughter gradually became home to young adults with their own dreams and ambitions. Where did the time go? Preston asked Olivia one evening as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. The children had arranged a surprise party, inviting neighbors and friends from all over the county. The house was full of people, food, and music, just as Olivia liked it. "It went into a good life," Olivia answered, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. She was 43 now, her dark hair showing threads of silver, but to Preston she was as beautiful as the day he had found her at the piano. A life well lived together. They danced that night in the parlor, surrounded by their children and friends, and Preston felt the same sense of wonder he had felt 20 years earlier, when this woman had walked into his life and changed everything. The piano played, though it was Peter at the keys now, his skill far surpassing both his mother's and his late aunt's. The music filled the house, and Preston pulled Olivia closer, grateful beyond words for every moment they had shared. The years marched on with their inevitable rhythm. Peter did go east to study music, attending a prestigious conservatory in New York. He wrote home regularly, his letters full of excitement about his studies and performances. Preston missed his oldest son fiercely, but was proud of him for following his passion. Josephine took over more and more of the ranch operations as Preston gradually stepped back. She had a talent for it that even exceeded his own, seeing opportunities and making improvements that Preston had never considered. She was also courting the son of a neighboring rancher, a good young man named Thomas who loved the land as much as she did. Benjamin went to university in California, studying law as he had planned. He, too, wrote home often and visited as much as his studies allowed. Preston and Olivia's house, which had been so full, grew quieter, but it was never empty. There were grandchildren coming now, starting with Josephine and Thomas's first child, a robust baby girl they named Margaret Olivia. When Preston held his granddaughter for the first time, named for both his sister and his wife, he wept openly. The circle felt complete somehow, the painful losses of his youth transformed through love and time into new life and hope. "She would have loved this," Olivia said, standing beside him, her hand on his shoulder. She knew he was thinking of Margaret, his sister, who had never had the chance to grow old to marry to have children of her own. She would have. Preston looked at his wife, this woman who had healed something broken inside him, who had brought music and love and life back into his world. "Thank you." For what? For everything. For staying that night, for playing the piano, for agreeing to marry me, for our children and our life together. All of it. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "You act as though you did not give me just as much. Preston, you gave me freedom and love and a home where I could be myself. You gave me music and children and a partner who respects me. We saved each other, remember?" Preston kissed her tenderly. "I remember, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." As Preston and Olivia entered their later years, their children thriving and their grandchildren growing, they fell into a new rhythm. Preston, now in his late 50s, worked less on the ranch, content to let Josephine run things with her sharp mind and steady hand. Olivia still played the piano daily, her fingers still nimble despite the arthritis beginning to creep into her joints. They took to sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the Montana landscape, holding hands like young lovers. Sometimes they talked about the past, remembering the strange and wonderful circumstances that had brought them together. Other times they sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only decades of marriage can create. "You remember the night we met?" Olivia asked one such evening. "How angry you were," Preston chuckled. "I was not angry so much as confused. No one had touched that piano in so long, and suddenly there you were, playing like you had always belonged there. Maybe I did. Maybe fate put my horse lame right there so I would find you. Or maybe you are just terrible at navigation and got hopelessly lost." Olivia swatted his arm playfully, and Preston caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Either way, I am grateful for that night, for the music that healed me when I did not even know I needed healing. The music was always there. It just needed someone to release it." "You released more than music. You released me from a prison of my own making." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. From inside the house, they could hear the sound of their youngest grandchild, Benjamin's daughter, experimenting with the piano, hitting random keys in a way that made both Preston and Olivia smile. "The piano will never be silent again," Olivia observed. "There will always be someone in this family to play it." "Good." Preston pulled her closer. "Music belongs in this house. It always has." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they had shared for so many years, Preston thought about the lonely man he had been before that fateful night. He thought about how close he had come to spending his whole life locked in grief, walled off from joy. And he thought about the miracle of Olivia walking into his life, her music and her love breaking down those walls and letting light back in. The sound of his family filled the house behind them, the voices, the laughter, the music that never stopped. This was happiness, Preston realized. Not the absence of pain or loss, but the courage to love despite knowing that loss was inevitable. It was choosing connection over isolation, music over silence, hope over fear. "I love you," he said to Olivia, the words as true and necessary as they had been on their wedding day. "I love you too," she replied, her head resting on his shoulder. "Always and forever." And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky above Montana, Preston Wade, the once lonesome rancher, held his wife close and gave thanks for the woman who had played his piano, healed his broken heart, and shown him that love was always worth the risk. The seasons turned as they always did, bringing Preston and Olivia deeper into their golden years together. Peter became a renowned pianist, performing in concert halls across the country, but always returning to Montana for the holidays, filling his childhood home with music that made his parents' hearts swell with pride. Josephine expanded the ranch to twice its original size, proving herself to be not just capable but visionary in her management. Benjamin became a successful lawyer in San Francisco, fighting for justice for those who could not afford it, living out the values his parents had instilled in him. The grandchildren came in steady succession, eventually numbering 9 in total. The ranch house, which Preston had expanded over the years, filled with laughter and chaos whenever the whole family gathered. And they gathered often, drawn back to this place where love had transformed loneliness into legacy. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family came home. Peter brought his wife, a cellist he had met in New York, and their 3 children. Josephine and Thomas came with their 4 children, the oldest now 15 and already showing signs of becoming as skilled a rancher as her mother. Benjamin brought his wife and 2 young sons. The house overflowed with people and noise and love. That evening they held a concert. Peter played first, performing a piece he had composed himself, dedicated to his parents. It was beautiful and complex, weaving together themes of loneliness and discovery, separation and reunion, loss and hope. When he finished, there was not a dry eye in the room. Then Olivia sat at the piano, the same instrument she had played that first night so many years ago. Her hands were not as nimble as they once were, her playing showed signs of age, but the emotion and passion were undiminished. She played the same piece she had been playing when Preston first discovered her, and he was transported back to that moment, feeling again the shock and wonder of hearing music in his silent house. When she finished, Preston stood and went to her. In front of their children and grandchildren, in front of the life they had built together, he took her hands and said, "Thank you for trespassing into my life. Thank you for playing this piano when I had convinced myself it should stay silent. Thank you for every day of these 30 years, and for healing something in me I thought was broken beyond repair." Olivia's face was wet with tears. "Thank you for letting me stay. Thank you for seeing past my trespassing to who I really was. Thank you for loving me and building this beautiful life with me." They kissed while their family applauded, and the sound of it mixed with laughter and the memory of music, creating a symphony of love that filled every corner of the house. Preston Wade lived to the age of 78, dying peacefully in his sleep with Olivia's hand in his. He had lived to see all his grandchildren grown, had danced at Josephine's twins' wedding, had heard Peter perform at Carnegie Hall, had watched Benjamin successfully defend a landmark case that changed laws across the state. He died knowing he had lived a full and meaningful life, surrounded by love until the very end. Olivia lived another 5 years after Preston's death. She played the piano daily, finding comfort in the music as she always had. The house was never empty, with Josephine and her family living on the ranch and the others visiting constantly. But Olivia missed Preston with an ache that never quite faded. She missed his steady presence, his quiet strength, his love that had been the foundation of everything good in her life. On a warm September evening, almost exactly 50 years after she had first played Preston's piano, Olivia sat down at the instrument one final time. Her grandchildren were gathered around, having come for Sunday dinner as they often did. She played a simple melody, one of the first pieces Preston had ever heard her play, and as the notes faded into the air, she closed her eyes and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, though whether to Preston, to the music, or to life itself, no one could say. She died that night, peacefully, surrounded by family, the sound of music still echoing in the house she had made a home. They buried her next to Preston on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the wide Montana sky they had both loved. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through Josephine's line. The piano remained in the parlor, played by generation after generation, its music never silenced. And when the great-grandchildren asked about the beautiful piano, about the couple in the old photographs on the wall, they were told the story of Preston and Olivia, the lonesome rancher and the woman whose music had healed him. They were told about that first night, about the trespass that became destiny, about the love that had transformed grief into joy. They were told about the power of music to reach into broken places and make them whole, about the courage it takes to love after loss, about the beauty of two people who found each other when they needed it most. And the piano played on, its music a living testament to a love story that had begun with a simple act of trespassing, and had bloomed into something that would never fade, a melody that would echo through the generations, reminding all who heard it that even in the loneliest places, in the darkest times, music and love can find a way to heal what is broken and make it whole again. The ranch house still stands in Montana, 20 miles outside of Concordia, surrounded by land that has been carefully tended for generations. The piano sits in the parlor, its keys worn smooth by countless hands, each one carrying forward the legacy of Olivia's music and Preston's love. On quiet evenings, if you listen carefully, you can almost hear the ghost of that first melody, the one that changed everything, floating on the Montana wind like a promise that love, once found, never truly ends.